Our conversations around diversity with professionals in the field continue. We're exploring what game changers are doing to make a mark in their industry. I'm Lynda Katz Wilner, and I'm joined with Kashonna Holland. Our company, DEI Conversations, conducts in-person and virtual training and workshops. Kashonna, why don't you introduce our guest today?
Thank you so much, Lynda. Well, today we are excited to introduce to you our speaker, Jenny Williams, who is the Senior HR Business Partner at GE Gas Power. Jenny, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time with us today.
Lynda and Kashonna, I am honored to be here. I thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to our dialogue today.
Well, let's jump right into it.
Awesome.
With so many acronyms related to DEI, we have DEI, DEIB, DEIBJ. We've had so many acronyms, again, related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What terminology have you adopted? And then tell us why.
So that's a great question, Kashonna. And I feel like because this space is evolving, our acronyms are probably going to continue to evolve. But I subscribe to DEIJB, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging. And as I learn more and experience more, I can't promise you that I won't add more to the acronym, but that's where I am today.
I totally understand that. I definitely agree with you. I believe that it will evolve. So we'll look forward to continuing that. Now, tell me, how do you define diversity? And then tell me if it is different from the way you've defined it, or you define it now versus 3 to 5 years ago.
I think that's a great question. 3 to 5 years ago, as a human resources professional, when we talked about diversity, there was a very narrow definition, and it had to do predominantly with females and US EEO or people of color in the United States. From a global perspective, though, it's just female versus male. Today, I've subscribed to a very broad definition of diversity, which is all of the differences that make us unique. That means that personal style, work experience, background, preferences can also contribute to your diversity. It's not just race and gender, or even not just those things defined by Title VII of the Civil Rights, which is what we point to in the US, but it's broader.
Jenny, as you've worked with this with GE, what are some of the challenges you've experienced in trying to have these D&I initiatives launched?
Sure. So a couple of challenges that I think I could point to. The first we started out with in our first question, which was the space is evolving and new components come into the space on a near regular basis. So just helping people keep up with the evolution of it is the challenges. The second challenge is the way that our culture has approached differences often leads to hurt and then exclusion. And so helping people to understand how to respond to, coach, prevent, or even repair cultures when something has happened that has been an exclusionary moment, and to do that in a right way. Some of our leaders fear tackling those topics because they don't want to be excluded as a leader themselves. So the personal impact of how to step into that the right way.
So those are some of your challenges. Can you tell us some of the successes that you've experienced along the way?
Sure. I think probably one of the best successes happened when I was in the aviation organization and I supported our legal group. And when you work with lawyers, there's words that matter and very, very specific words that matter. Working with that client base, learning about inclusion, we used a process called Talk About It Tuesday and Think About It Thursday, where we met twice a week for an hour and we just talked about topics. And the topics were heavily facilitated in probably the first month. And they were facilitated by people like me who were used to talking about inclusion topics. And then we had broader individuals in the organization that wanted to jump in. And so we would pair them with a facilitator to make sure that they said the right things and that they knew what to say. But we allowed other people to come in and lead dialogues. That's where the real growth happened, where inexperienced facilitators came in and got to facilitate a topic that was near and dear to their hearts.
I love the Talk About It Tuesdays and Think About It Thursdays. And tell us a little more about the Think About It Thursdays. What was done there?
The Think About It Thursdays were topics where people were able to bring in like their perspective or their experience and give others the opportunity to think about how it would have impacted them. And there, in the beginning, there was a lot of dialogue around, wow, I didn't realize this still happened today. And the reality is, from an experience standpoint, everybody's entitled to their experience. So I'm going to give just a quick example. Let's say, Lynda, you love roller coasters. And you and I are at an amusement park and we decide to ride a roller coaster. We pay our $5, get our ticket, stand in line together. We get to the front of the line. You say front car. I say, okay, we get in and we ride. When we get off that roller coaster, you say that was the best ride. Let's do it again. I hate roller coasters. I just ride with you because I'm your friend. And I got out and said that was the worst experience of my life. I will never do that again, especially not in the front car. The reality is we paid the same $5, stood in the same line, sat in the same car, side by side, screamed at the same times. We had very different experiences on that roller coaster. That's what Think About It Thursdays illustrated for people.
Wow. I love what you're saying here. I think that when you're inviting people in to have an experience and saying, your experience does matter. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And of course, as Lynda and I are doing this work, one of the things that we hear a lot of times is people asking, okay, how do I start? Where do I get started to initiate this DEI or this conversation? What do I need to do? So we want to open the floor to you and give people some tips and tools on how to do that.
Find a common book, a common language, a common article, or a topic to talk about, step one, and provide it in advance so people have the opportunity to digest. And then when I facilitate a dialogue, I come in with my intent first. I state my intent is to have a great dialogue. I have no intent to offend anyone, but I may. And if I do, I'm going to trust that you're going to tell me I did. And I'm going to listen and I'll handle it with grace. But please don't let me offend you and not know, right? If I offend you, because I came in with that intent, people are more likely to give you feedback and to forgive. And so I think those are two great ways to go into dialogues that might be uncomfortable.
So what I'm hearing you say, Jenny, is number one, find a resource. And then number two, start with intent. Is that safe to say?
Sure.
Awesome.
And I also hear you're opening yourself to be vulnerable. Like, let me know, right? Don't leave that meeting and say, I cannot believe what Jenny was saying.
Absolutely.
But just bring it to the table right away so it doesn't fester. I think that's a big problem people have.
Yes.
Well, and the interesting thing, Lynda, is I've been doing inclusion and diversity for 20 years. I still make mistakes. You would think that I would know by now. But I still step into the wrong word or the wrong phrase or the wrong dialogue periodically, and I have to step myself back out of it.
Well, I also think, Jenny, it's become the diversity and inclusion, or whatever we choose to call it these days, is including more groups. And so we don't know everything about every group. So when we're dealing with something like neurodiversity or learning differences, are you an expert in that? I'm not an expert in every one of those categories or those classifications. And so we will make mistakes.
Yes.
And there'll be somebody in the room who knows more than we do. And hopefully we can listen and learn from it.
Provide a level of grace for people to do that.
We can always learn.
Absolutely.
And we will always step on something, right? And have to accept it and learn from it. And again, I think, and show that we can change our behavior.
Sure. The
That's a
reality
big
is if
point.
you don't make a mistake, you're not learning.
Right.
You already know it.
Oh, that's
Now,
good.
What resources or books have you seen that you highly recommend that will make a big difference in people's approach or their mindset?
Probably my favorite current book is the book Just, like the word justice, Work by Kim Scott. And this book was wildly impactful for me. I read her first book, Radical Candor. I loved it. I'm a direct communicator. I adopted the style and I coached from it. And I tried to teach my leaders how to display radical candor. And I queued up Just Work on a road trip in Audible. And it was a 6-hour road trip and it took me 11 hours because I kept pulling over making notes. And eventually, after the 4th time pulling over, I had to go to Amazon and just order the book because I could see slides in my head and I could see dialogues that I wanted to facilitate. But she talks about why her own book, Radical Candor, didn't work for everybody. And when you can be a best-selling author and talk about why your first book might not help everybody, that is authenticity that I want to learn. And the other thing is the book is wildly full of stories in the workplace of real live examples that happen to us, that have happened to other people that I could identify with that brought the concept to life.
Jenny, before you go further with this, could you backtrack a little bit? And for those who don't know, explain what radical candor actually means?
Sure. So radical candor was a communication style that Kim Scott introduced that said, if you care personally and deeply about people and you challenge them directly, you live in this space called radical candor. And if you don't care deeply and you're not willing to challenge, you live in other places that aren't the best. And manipulative insincerity, obnoxious aggression, just other places. And so the reality though, and if you listen to the very beginning of Kim's book, you will hear that women of color, people of color can't necessarily challenge directly, even though they care. And so hearing that, Kim actually questioned herself in the book and said, I can't believe that I didn't represent my own colleagues well, and I didn't know well enough to know the gaps. And for me, that was me writing a book from a place of privilege. And when an author can say that about their own bestseller, that's a book worth reading.
That is so good. I enjoy that. I love the fact that you saw the gap there, or she saw the gap there, and immediately was able to, like you said, take the responsibility and address that. So that was good.
Sure.
Jenny, you mentioned there were a lot of stories in the Just Work book.
Yes.
Which stories stand out to you? Are there any particular ones that resonated with you? Well, there were most of them did.
Yeah, in the very beginning, there's this story actually resonated with me because it's happened to me. Kim talks about giving a speech at a tech conference and talks about the fact that she was the headliner. And all of the folks that were producing the conference had on yellow t-shirts. And right before she was about to go on to give her speech, a male speaker who was further down in the lineup came up to her with his shirt gapping open and a button missing and said, quick, I need a safety pin. And she said, in that moment, I realized he thought that I was producing the event. He didn't realize I was the headliner. How many times have you been somewhere in a place? You know, I think about buying my first car with my husband, my car in my name only with my money, but the dealer wouldn't talk to me. And I let the dealer talk to him versus saying, hey, I'm the one actually buying the car. He's like just here for the ride. It's happened to us as females. It's happened to people of color. It's even happened to males in female-dominated environments where people think that you're playing a role different than the role that you're actually playing.
That's not lost even in healthcare, because there are many times elderly go to doctors, and who do the doctors talk to? The patient's child, the adult child who's in the room. And unless a person learns to speak up, it doesn't change.
That's right.
And again, it's good intentions because you want to communicate information, but it's not to the right person.
That's right.
There was something in the book that I know after you recommended this book to me about even a woman with different cultural differences, because we didn't really talk about that so far, but the cultural differences where she was the only female and they wouldn't let her use the restroom. And we've seen that play out in movies. I think Hidden Figures. It's played out in movies, but there was that scenario where they had to, do you want to talk about that? Because it was related, I think a male supported her and spoke up for her.
Yeah.
About going back to the hotel.
I can actually share a personal story.
Okay, that's even better.
Before my GE time, but I went on a team outing with an organization that I supported as the HR leader. And as the HR leader, I was the only female that supported this organization. And we were going on a half-day fishing trip. We were all asked to bring certain items for the trip. I brought sandwiches. That's what I volunteered to make. And when we showed up, there was a cooler of beer. And when we got on the boat, I realized there wasn't a bathroom. And so I asked the captain, how far out are we going? Is there a bathroom trip scheduled? And what's the plan? And one of my colleagues that I supported said, I don't know about you, Jenny, but the bathroom for me is a blindfold for you. And I got frustrated because that meant he could use the restroom off the side of the boat, but there was nothing for me. And he was more concerned with me not seeing him than whether or not I had a restroom facility available for me. So in probably not my finest moment as a young HR leader, I got mad and left the boat and got in the car and left the trip and decided I wasn't going to participate. In reality, today, I would have handled that situation differently and worked with the captain to plan, maybe a come back into the harbor. But it was an afterthought. And it was an afterthought because I was with a group of individuals that didn't have to worry about an actual restroom facility.
And hopefully now, years later, and with people being more educated about this, hopefully there'll be somebody who would say to you, you're right, we need to find something for you and not just leave you excluded.
Sure.
We can talk on, and I know you have wonderful stories and unbelievable experience in the field and your own stories to talk about. Are there any specific tips you want to leave us with on what people can do as they're attempting to move and launch these initiatives into their workplace?
I think my first piece of advice is, in order to launch any type of initiative in the workplace, you've got to know where you are. So if you can start anywhere, you've got to start by knowing what your data is. GE started with inclusion-related initiatives, or restarted with inclusion-related. We've always had them, but we restarted a couple of years ago. We spent almost a year with our leaders just asking them to know their data. What is their representation and what does their data say? And over the course of a year, you can watch that data change, right? Then you dig into the why and the how. So know where you are and then know where you want to go. And then the next thing is just take a step. Martin Luther King says, you don't have to see the whole staircase to take the first step. But as long as you stand there trying to see the whole staircase and not taking a step, you're not moving.
That's wonderful. Good. Final comments. That's a wonderful way to look at it. So it's baby steps, but I like the image of the staircase even more.
Yes. I just so appreciate, Jenny, your candidness, and I appreciate you sharing your stories and your real life stories, actually, because I believe that it kind of brings to life that this is an issue. There are challenges that we definitely need to be bold and courageous enough to confront. And I also appreciate your vulnerability because you address the fact that I didn't handle it correctly in that moment. And it does take a level of emotional intelligence to be able to handle these situations where there are microaggressions and there are, places where people are not fair and not feeling like they belong, or not feeling like, people are aware of the issues that are going on around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So again, I just appreciate your openness and appreciate your willingness to share and be vulnerable in that moment.
Thank you both for having me. I appreciate the opportunity, and I love talking with the two of you about this topic.
Thank you.
These conversations will continue. I don't think I have anything more to add. Kashonna, you said it beautifully. So thanks again, Jenny. And we look forward to more conversations because we're learning a lot from you just having these conversations.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jenny.